Dr. Esterberg, I am so pleased to welcome you today to the Ingenious You community.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to jump right in because one of the things our listeners are always so interested in is knowing something about your leadership journey. So, as I look back across your career from sociology professor all the way forward to now chancellor, what have been the most defining moments in your journey? Could you share one or two of these?
Sure. Well, I think back to when I was a department chair in a sociology department, a very small sociology department. And we served a large number of students who were the children of Cambodian refugees or refugees themselves. And I remember I worked with one student intensively. She had taken a number of my classes, and she kept coming to see me in office hours, and she was really struggling. She was the child of genocide and was really struggling with a number of personal issues. I believe she had experienced a sexual assault, and she kept coming to see me in office hours. And I just made whatever space and time I could for her. And one day she came into my office and she brought a jar full of little paper stars and little paper cranes, really tiny paper, origami paper, cranes and stars that she had made, she said, so that she wouldn't kill herself and that she was doing better now. And she thanked me for sort of being there for her. And I keep that jar today in my office as a reminder as a reminder of the power of advising and the power of one faculty member or one staff member to reach out to a student in ways that really, really matter. And I'll share with you, some years later, I was the provost at Salem State University, which was down the road from that institution. And I was sitting on stage at commencement, as a provost does. And I looked across the stage and they were calling the Masters of Social Work students. And there was that student. I just stood up and we hugged. But it just reminded me that advisors, faculty members, staff members, we have the power. And to see that student succeed gives me chills today. And so when I think about what that means to me, it means that we need to create space for the adults on campus, the faculty members, students, to have authentic relationships with students, because you never know what difference that will make.
Yeah, wow, that is compelling. And I'm almost left speechless. I am envisioning that moment on the stage when you saw her and everything that must have gone through your
I tear up thinking about
yeah,
it. I
yeah.
do. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. That is it's profound, but also I can tell deeply personal and meaningful. So, what drew you into administrative work? So you were a very happy
I,
and
I was.
effective faculty member. So, they joke about going over to the dark side. I don't really think it's a dark side, but what drew you into administrative work?
It's really funny. As a department chair, one of the things I loved was that you could lift the barriers that stopped students from succeeding, and you could create an environment in which faculty members could do their best work. And that was really exciting to me as a department chair when I could see my little department do better, right? Create a better place for the faculty to teach. And I could think about what are those barriers, especially for transfer students? What are the barriers that stop students from succeeding? And I loved that work, right? I was teaching, I was chairing, but then a colleague who became the provost at UMass Lowell, he said, would you think about becoming an associate provost? There's a role opening up. And I thought about that and I thought, well, that sounds like fun. And again, what I loved was that at a slightly larger stage, I could lift barriers that stop students from succeeding, and I could try to do my best to create an environment in which faculty members could do their best work.
Mm.
And I think at every stage, I've been very excited to see, can I create spaces where institutions can get better and where we can serve the students better, where we can serve our staff and faculty better, and where we can serve our regions. And that's just really been for me important. And I'm a social person, and there is something very social about administrative work. You have to work in teams. You've got to work well with others. And I really find that incredibly gratifying.
Yeah. Well, I remember somebody saying when I went from being a faculty member to then eventually becoming the provost, somebody said, you go from I to we. You have
Yeah,
to be able, if you're going to last and be successful as an administrator, you do have to change that mindset, right? Because as a faculty member, it's kind of all about us and our identity as faculty. But so
yeah.
you go ahead.
I do remember very early on in my administrative career, it was it was around it was winter, it was around the holiday season, and I remember, my office, there were administrative assistants and a variety of folks, and we were having a sort of small holiday gathering in the office. And I remember a faculty member coming in to turn in some paperwork. I can't remember what it was. And he had this very wistful look on his face. And that's when it crystallized for me how lonely it can be to be a
Mm,
faculty member. It's you and your classroom,
mm.
but most of your work is really solo, unless if you're in the social sciences and your research is solo. Many bench scientists have a different experience. But it occurred to me that one of the beauties of doing administrative work was that you did have a team. And it's really lovely to be able to work with others to do things that move your institution forward.
Indeed. Now, you've been in leadership roles for several years now, and I would imagine you've evolved and you've changed, and there have been many forces that have perhaps shaped your development as a leader. Could you share some of the most impactful influences on your own development as a leader?
Yeah, sure. As a sociologist, I've always loved the stories of ordinary people who just show up every day and do their best every day. They rise to whatever is thrown at them. And so for me, ordinary people really have shaped my leadership style because I just love the stories of folks who who show up for themselves every day or show up for their institution. So those stories, whether it's folks who work in physical plant, whether it's folks who work in offices, whether it's faculty members, those stories have actually had a real impact on me. There's one leader in particular, though, that I'm very thankful for. Dr. Marcy Williams. She was the senior vice chancellor for academic and student affairs at the UMass system when I was just emerging. And I was really fortunate to work with her for a number of years around things that I was really passionate about, international education. And I had never really thought of myself as a leader in that way. But she looked at me one day and said, well, when you're a college president, I had never thought about myself in that way. And I don't think I heard a single thing she said after that, but that changed my thinking. And so now when I work with emerging leaders or I work with students or I work with faculty members, I try, if I see that in them, to name it. So for a student, I might say, well, when you go on to graduate school or when you finish your PhD, or if I see somebody who in the faculty ranks has leadership potential, well, when you become a dean, and it shifts their thinking about themselves, especially for folks who look in the mirror and don't see people in leadership who look like them. And I would say I use that, when I think about Dr. Williams and the impact she had on me, I try and emulate that same practice so that others can see in themselves what others, right? What this outsider sees in them.
Yeah. Wow, that is so important. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And lucky students or emerging leaders who are on the other side of your table when they hear that. But it's so very true that having somebody else name it makes it more real. So now you've talked about your background as a sociologist. I'd like to know a little bit more about how your training as a sociologist helped to shape the lens you use when you look at life around you in an
Right.
institution, and
Sure.
how else does it show up in your leadership?
Oh my, I use my sociology degree every day. I would say, in terms of interviewing, I'm very curious about people. I think that that is a hallmark of sociologists, that we're curious about people. And so if I go into a setting, whether it's a student event, an orientation program, a faculty event, or an advancement event, I'm really curious to hear about people's stories. And I think interviewing skills lead you to try and find ways to elicit people's stories. So I use that all the time. I love data. And I think when we look at institutional improvement, you need to find ways to measure how are we doing? And so I think being fluent with data, both qualitative and quantitative, is useful. And I spent a lot of time thinking about organizational structures and how do organizations create opportunities for people to do good work, or conversely, for people to do less than good work. And I'm often going back to the literature to try and understand, are there things we can do as an institution that will improve employees' experience, that will improve faculty experience, that will improve students' experience? Are there tweaks we can make in how we're organized that will help us do better? So I use those skills all the time.
It's the sociologist coming through in you. Now, you have led institutions through significant changes and challenges, and I'm curious if there's one experience that has stayed with you in terms of being particularly meaningful or something you learned a lot from.
I will say probably one of the most difficult experiences. I was a new president. I was, for 7 years, the president of the State University of New York at Potsdam, and I don't think I'd been there more than 6 months. And we had these lovely student performances, and I was in a theater watching a student performance, and my phone started buzzing, and I realized I needed to leave. I learned that one of our faculty members had experienced death threats in a note slipped under his door, and that brought on I don't know how long I'd been president at that point, 6 months, maybe, certainly less than a year. But that was such a difficult experience. And it was an ongoing crisis for months because of the nature of that. And what I learned was that in those moments, you need to be mindful of sort of the faculty member and what he was experiencing, the real threat that he was feeling. You had to be mindful of the students and the things that they were feeling. A lot of information got out in ways that were really challenging. And I think one of the hardest things for that experience was that when the criminal investigation went on, there was a lot that we knew that we couldn't share that was really actually very reassuring, but we couldn't share it because they were building a case. And I think for me, that hardest lesson was I knew the campus was okay and I knew why, but I couldn't say. And I think for me, that was a real challenge because I couldn't reassure folks in the way that I knew they needed to be reassured. So that was, I will say that was probably one of the most difficult experiences,
No, I
concluded successfully, but oh my. And it just tells you in moments of crisis, you need to be there and you need to be present and you need to be accountable and you need to listen deeply. And then sometimes you just need to act even when, yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you what your approach is when you encounter an unexpected or a complex situation, and those sound like the things that you probably routinely do,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you absolutely need to listen deeply. You need to try and understand what are the impacts of whatever this is on your entire set of stakeholders. You might not know, right? That, or you might not be thinking that the community that your campus is embedded in might have some impact. So you need to try and understand very broadly and very deeply what the impacts are. And for me, I'm a great reader. I like to understand, is there something in history that will help us make sense of this moment? Can I look at things that other have done in similar situations? I try and bring in folks. I like my leadership team to be very diverse in approach. And so I try and bring folks who would approach problems very differently in so that I can get just a broad swath of advice and then do the best I can to make a decision.
Yeah, those are great. That's great guidance for anybody in terms of encountering any number of things. And there's certainly a lot that's coming our way these days, right?
Surely is.
So what's your why for leadership? What's the thing that keeps you engaged and going, and how does it play out in your
Uh,
day-to-day leading?
when I see students graduate, and especially in a regional public university, I am passionate about our
Oh,
mission because we serve students, we serve the most amazing students. And when I see students who are the first in their families to graduate and their entire family, their extended family is able to be there, that is the best day ever because you know that you're not just changing that one student's life, you're changing their family trajectory. I think about there's one student that I was able to, a UW Bothell student I was able to meet this year. He's a Marine, and I've learned you never say a former Marine, even though he is no longer currently serving. And he came from California. His mother spoke no English and cleaned houses. His father was not that present. And he found his way to UW Bothell after a career in the Marines. And he talked about, he had a job before he even graduated. And he was so proud. And I feel so proud because he knew that his children were going to have a very different experience from
mm,
him. And I just get chills when I think about students like him because their whole family trajectory will look different
mm.
because of what they were able to accomplish. So to create an environment where students can succeed like that, that is the best thing in the universe.
Yeah, it doesn't get any better, does it?
It
No.
doesn't.
So you were leading a campus when we went through the pandemic,
Yes.
and you moved an entire campus virtually almost overnight. What are the takeaways for you from that experience to the present?
Well, that was surely a very difficult period. But one thing that I was so proud of was how faculty rallied and pivoted. I was on a campus that had almost no experience with online. We were very residential, very much based on the personal relationship between students and faculty and students and staff. And so to see the entire campus figure out
Mm.
how to do this remotely was just inspiring for me. Difficult, absolutely difficult. The other takeaway I've learned is we lost something
Mm.
when we went fully remote. There's something important about face-to-face human relationships that's deeply important. And I think what I've seen is that some of our social skills deteriorated during that time. And so it's been a bit of a challenge to try and exercise those muscles again. But what I've also learned is we can do some things in a hybrid format that actually serve students better and that serve our employees better. And so I think coming out of that, I think we've learned a little bit of flexibility. And now I think we're in that space where we're trying to figure out when do we really need to be face to face? When do we really need to be together? And when can we and should we do something remotely? And I think we're finding our way through that.
I'm
But
curious how AI factors into your thinking about this.
I'm not alarmist about AI. I think we'll see students using it in some creative ways, some of which actually, I've been reading some stories of students who use it to study better, who create study guides for themselves. And so I think it's not going to be as apocalyptic as maybe some fear, but I do worry. I worry a lot about some of our students' employment. Some of those entry-level jobs may
Mm.
be going away or dramatically changed.
As you know better than most, university leadership has evolved quite a bit to now include responsibilities, significant responsibilities for revenue generating. So,
Mhm.
fundraising and entrepreneurial type activity. How have you approached that aspect of the role?
I will say fundraising is one of the greatest joys of the presidency or the chancellor role. I love that work because what you're doing is you are working with folks who are philanthropically minded, who want to make a difference about something that matters. And so my experience fundraising has been mostly you're working with folks who really care about your institution and want to do something, and you're helping to find an opportunity for them to have an impact. And so for me, when you find that beautiful intersection of philanthropic will and an idea and a passion and a need for the university, that's a gorgeous thing. And
Mhm.
so I think especially on regional public universities like UW-Bothell, a donor can have extraordinary impact and can be really, really meaningful. Even though for a very large university, that might be a small gift, for us, it's amazing. And so I love that part of the role, and I'm very excited about that.
Do you have a story about a gift that you were involved in
Mhm.
securing that has been particularly meaningful?
Sure. This is at my former institution, and we were working with just a really lovely, lovely set of donors. He had the largest RV dealership in the United States, and his wife was an alum and a music major. And they knew that an institution like that needed to build capacity. Scholarships are really important, but they knew that if we were going to give every student the opportunity to apply what they were learning in the classroom in a setting outside of the classroom, they needed a gift that was a little bit more flexible. And so it was the largest gift I'd ever solicited. It was about a $5 million gift. And when I think about this particular couple, we were able to name the Applied Learning Center after them. And I still remember that moment when they came onto the campus and they saw for the first time their name. And this 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 just lovely man started to weep at what he was able to accomplish. And every time this particular couple came on campus, and they came regularly for concerts and events, and students would come up to them and they felt like rock stars because of what they were able to accomplish. It was lovely.
I love that story. And that really is what it's all about at the end of the day, is right, enabling people to be able to do good and add meaning to their own life uh, through
Exactly.
their philanthropy. So now I want to switch gears here a little bit. I know you've done a lot of writing
Mhm.
about 1970s, the influence of the
Yes.
1970s, and your own college experience. What can
Mhm.
you tell us in the confines of this podcast conversation
Sure.
about how those years shaped your understanding of what it means to belong, what it means to be part of a
Mhm.
community, and so on?
Yeah. You know, I was that student who opened up the bill and realized I don't have the funds to pay for this. So I never lived on campus. I didn't have the means to do that. And I shared an apartment off campus with my sister and who's going to another school in the same, we were both in the Boston area. So she was going to another school and we saved money by living together in an apartment. But I found a small congenial home in the Women's Center. And that became the place where I tried to create community. I learned so much there and with that small group. And when I think about that period, right, there were no rainbow flags on the campus. There was no lavender graduation, but we were able to create our small kind of underground community that was really powerful for us. And I think what that told me was that we do have the capacity to create community in ways that matter to us where we are. But it also led me to want to create a better experience for students now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, how did you do it? How, if you think back to that time, how did it, I mean, it sounds magical almost as you talk about it now, but how did community come to be?
You know, I'm not sure I exactly know that. We hung out. There was actually a physical space. So I do
Okay,
think physical spaces for students really matter, especially for students who commute, because that was the
sure.
place I could hang out during the day because I actually had a fairly long walk back and forth to campus. So I think having a physical space mattered. We worked on programming. We had some staff who were extraordinarily helpful in
Mhm.
trying to help us create programs that mattered to us. But again, a lot of that was just kind of underground. We flew under the radar. But we were also very influenced by that second wave feminist movement, which was at a particular historical moment. It was waning a bit,
Right.
but in the Boston Cambridge area, there was still a lot of liveliness there. And I think we tried to create connections with that broader community in ways that helped us as a small organization feel connected to a
Sure.
larger community and also gave us purpose and things that
Mm,
we felt we needed to do.
mm.
And then I was able to shift some of my coursework in that same area. And so I think even though we were not sort of officially welcomed in that way, I think we were able to create for ourselves a kind of community that spoke to us and that mattered.
Well, it sounds very much like that was the case. Now, you've been very open about your experience as an LGBTQ leader in higher education. What has that journey been like for you? And how is it that you comfortable being open right from the outset, or how did that evolve?
You know, my earliest work was all on lesbian and bisexual identity. So I I'm grateful because
Uh-huh.
I never had a choice not to be open. The minute you looked at my CV, you understood um, sort of what kind of candidate you had. And I think for me, that's been very important. I'm not somebody who is very good at hiding. I like to be the same person pretty much everywhere I go. And so for me, it's been very, very important. This is who I am. This is what my work is. This is what my values are. And this is what my life looks like. And so for me, I'm sure there were opportunities that never presented themselves. I know for sure there were parts of the country in which I didn't feel I could live. My partner and I have been together for 37 years. We raised two children, and we knew there were parts of the country where our family would would have great difficulty.
Mm.
So we thought about where we would go. But for me, it's always been important to be authentic.
Mm.
This is who I am.
So you are now the board president
Right.
of LGBTQ leaders in higher education, which I don't know how long the organization has been around, but I think it's terrific that it exists. Do you
Yeah.
know how many years you've been in existence?
Oh my gosh, we started as LGBTQ presidents in higher education. And
Okay.
up until a couple of years ago, we were only presidents. Then it
Uh,
became really clear that emerging leaders, we needed to expand and we needed to think about pathways for folks at different parts of their career. But I'll tell you, when we first started, it was really a Chronicle of Higher Education article that said, oh my goodness, look, there are, I don't know, 5 or 6 openly lesbian or gay presidents, college presidents in the United States. There was an article, I think there was a picture of I think there were 6. This might have been, I'm thinking around 2012, maybe somewhere around there. And that formed the start first of an informal network of open LGBTQ presidents and chancellors. And then, over time we've grown. So we've been around in one way or another for 12, 13 years.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's really in the last 2 that we've shifted.
So given where we now sit with the political winds swirling all around us, as the president or as the board chair of this group, I'm sure you have a very interesting vantage point from which to look and think about where things are and where we might be going. So, do you have any, and again, I guess I would frame this in terms of, maybe advice or perspective that might help an emerging leader who
Sure.
may very well want to go on to a senior level role. What would you tell that person?
What would I tell the person who wants to become a leader? This is, I will say, a really challenging time, even though there are many, many more openly lesbian and gay chancellors and presidents than ever before. But what we're finding is some of our membership lives in states where they don't feel safe being out. Some of our members live in states where they're hesitant or afraid to travel. And so I think what I would say is emerging leaders need to think really carefully about the institutions where they feel they can do their best and most authentic work and reach out to those of us who have been around. I don't believe we're going back in large measures into the closet. I think that ship has sailed. But I do know we're seeing folks feeling a little bit more hesitant about being open. I will say, especially our trans and non-binary members who
Mhm.
are really, I think, had felt a couple of years ago that they were at the cusp of really important social change. And I think they are especially feeling the backlash right now. While we have dozens of openly lesbian and gay chancellors and presidents, to my knowledge, there's not one open trans or non-binary president or chancellor. And I don't know that that glass ceiling is going to be cracked soon, just given the particular climate in which we live right now.
So where do you get your hope from? You do strike me as a hopeful, resilient person. As the board president of the organization, I'm sure that people look to you. So where do you draw hope for, and I won't ask you to look into your crystal ball, but what do you tell yourself every morning?
Sure, I am a hopeful person, and I do get great hope from everyday people doing extraordinary things every day. But for this particular historical moment, I get great hope from studying history. Some of my earliest writing was on the homophile movement in the 40s and 50s. And I spent a lot of time looking at McCarthy era documents. And I keep saying we are not in that place now. As a movement, we are more organized, we are smarter. When I look at the wave of public opinion, especially among young people, I don't believe that we are going back to that period. But I do think we need to learn from that period, especially the 1950s. We need to learn from that to see what tactics and strategies can we use. When I think about the McCarthy era, the risk of being out if you had a government job,
Mhm.
or the risk was so great. Thousands of people lost their jobs simply for being suspected of being lesbian or gay. We are not quite in that moment now, very much not. The other piece that I take great comfort from, and this is some social movement work that looks at times that are more propitious for movements and times that are less so. And in those less propitious times, there are organizations that keep the ideals alive for when things become more propitious again. And I feel committed to being part of an organization that will keep doing the work, keeping our mission front and center, keep working with emerging leaders, and keep sharing our stories so that when things look different, those emerging leaders will have good places to land and to enter into.
That's a really, really hopeful and helpful way to think about this. So thank you for sharing that. And I can see how what you have studied really helps to frame this in a way that would be helpful for everybody. So how do you balance it so you are an institutional leader, you're in a very public
Mhm.
role.
Mhm.
You obviously have to watch what you say and do, as we've learned from other leaders around the country. How do you balance it?
Yeah. Well, I know as chancellor, my job is always to protect the campus first, but I am so grateful. I have such amazing leadership that I report to in the University of Washington. We have an amazing board of regents. I feel very confident that I am in a university setting in which I can do my best work. And so for me, that is really important that I am in a place. The University of Washington is very mission driven, very values driven. And I feel this great agreement between my value system and the universities. And I think that's really critical. But the other piece is, I'm a passionate endurance athlete, and when things get
Oh,
hard, I go for a run, or I go for a bike ride, or I do something hard.
that's good for you. Good for you. What's your longest? You're also probably competitive. Is there a competitive? Yeah.
That is true.
So
Um,
what's your personal best in that regard?
I did an Ironman triathlon this summer.
Whoa. I feel like I should send up all the little hurrahs for that. That's terrific. How long did you have to train for that?
I trained for the better part of a year, but I do work with a coach, and I was saying I've actually been training for this my entire life because I've run, I've ridden my bicycle, I've
Yeah.
swum, I've done all of these things, and this was the opportunity to put it all together.
Wow. Well, congratulations. I think you're the first president chancellor I've interviewed who has that distinction. So we'll have to figure out a way to put it in the title of the episode. So, is there anything you wish you had known about leadership when you were starting out?
I think in my very early years, I had just come from the faculty. And so I thought I knew what faculty felt and thought. I wished I'd understood I was not perceived as faculty, and I needed really to listen much harder to faculty voices. And I think that was a lesson that I have taken with me. The other piece is every campus is a little bit different, has a different culture, a different way of doing things. And so just spending a little bit of time trying to understand, how does this campus work? What's important here? What what do people care about, so that you are consonant with the goals of the organization? I think that's a really important lesson.
And is there, if you think about leadership, a leadership toolbox, let's say, and again, somebody who's preparing for an eventual role as president or chancellor, what kinds of things do they need to be putting in their toolbox?
Oh my, good listening skills. Absolutely, first and foremost, the ability to listen, but then the ability to hear, and especially the ability to hear opinions that don't look like yours. I think that's absolutely critical. I think today, social media skills, and that doesn't mean you need to be posting on Instagram or TikTok, but it means you need to be aware that really anytime you are in public, anytime you say something, you could be videoed, you could be put out there. And so a real care for how your statements might be used. I think and I think you've got to, in higher education, I think you have to love faculty and you have to love students. And if you don't love education and you don't love learners and teachers, you're probably not in the right space. You've got to love your institution and you've got to love the people in it.
Well said. So we have a signature question that we ask at the end of every conversation. So as a woman leader who has navigated your own path in academe, what do you hope your leadership makes possible for others so that they can find their place of belonging?
I would say it's really important for folks who don't historically think of themselves as leaders to be able to look in that mirror and say, I could do this. And if I have any impact, I hope it's that. The other piece that I hope people would take away is that leadership happens all over campus. It happens among our amazing staff. It happens among our students. It happens among our faculty. And I think what's important, what I would hope, is that everybody who's a part of our community feels like they are a leader in some way or another. And whether it's you're a leader, I'll share with you, UW Bothell is known for our extraordinary work on sustainability. And it's actually our physical plant staff and our sustainability coordinator that are the leaders in sort of presenting that work, not just on our campus, but in the wider community. And so when I think about my leadership, I want folks who don't historically think of themselves as leaders to feel that they are leaders also.
Kristin, you are an inspiring leader, and I am so grateful to have had this time with you today. I very much appreciate the time and your willingness to share your story. I know this is going to be inspiring to many people, so thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to have this conversation with you.